beautiful people. How is everybody doing this Sunday morning? Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Those of you guys who are just tuning in for the first time, my name is Brent, owner of Canis Behavior and Training. And if you guys got our email or some of our text alerts, today is going to be a really, really important, what I would consider to be a pretty important subject matter. Because we're going to be talking about a very common buzzword in dog training called dominance, right? Let me actually go ahead and move this light real quick. You know what I'm saying? Cool. That should work a little better. All right. Okay, so I think it's really important that we talk about this terminology of dominance, right? A lot of times, we've all seen TV shows or we've all seen, talk to dog trainers probably where they've discussed kind of the importance of relationship building. And hold on, can you guys hear me? Is the microphone working? Let's see. Okay, cool. So in dominance, the word dominance gets thrown around a lot. And honestly, the word dominance is a little bit of an oversimplification of a fairly complex social system, right? And so what we want to talk about today is we want to talk about what dominance is. We want to talk about ultimately what it isn't. We want to talk about how it pertains to our relationship with dogs. We also want to kind of debunk a couple things that we might run into in the dog ownership field, right? So let's go ahead and talk about two different perspectives of dominance, right? So dominance theory began probably about 40 years ago. The mentality was, and this is coming from wolf research, but the difference was that these were wolves that were in captivity. Okay, people saw that wolves were fighting over, resources. They were pretty much saying who's the biggest, toughest guy in that, or guy or girl in that pack. And what happens is pretty much you had wolves fighting over scarcity, right? There wasn't a true assessment of what a pack dynamic really is. So that type of information started getting passed to the public. And this is where we started learning ideas of like hierarchies, right? Every pack has an alpha, beta, gamma, omega, et cetera. And there's these hierarchies within. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about hierarchies, but if you kind of look at our family dynamics, we tend to see more natural hierarchies. In those particular settings, with the captive wolves, a lot of times they were fighting over resources. They were frustrated. They were not able to be normal wolves. They weren't able to mate normally, hunt normally. And so what ended up happening is this tended to giving us a skewed idea of what wolf behaviors are. All right. And now it's very easy for us to make that comparison. Dogs are wolves. But here's the funny thing. Dogs have actually evolved genetically to be very different from the wild wolf. Right. So it's very similar to like how we're very closely related to Cro-Magnon men, but we're not Cro-Magnon men, right? We're far further evolved. Our brains are a little bit bigger or shifted in a little bit different way because what we needed in order to survive shifted as well, right? So this is where dominance theory kind of started. Now, through dominance theory, unfortunately, this also happened around a time where military, obviously we love our military, but at the same time where military mindset was priority. So this idea of alpha, beta, gamma, omega, having a ranks, having a hierarchy, all this stuff really made a lot of sense to the community at that time, right? The problem that happened is a lot of dogs' behaviors started getting like the solution for certain dogs' behaviors was that, oh, they were dominant, or they were trying to take control of you, or they were trying to, do something to impugn you, right? And so this tends to be the common mentality of dominance dog training. So people would say, oh, the reason the dog's putting his paw on you is because he's trying to be dominant over you, or he's trying to control you, or the reason the dog is misbehaving is because he doesn't think you're the boss. And so like they're very kind of like, in my opinion, they're very 5-year-old, 6-year-old explanations of behavior and toughness. And so over the years, right, over the last 40 years, we've, you know, a lot of scientists, a lot of researchers, Stanley Coren, John Meck, who else? You know, dog trainers like Ian Dunbar, Karen Pryor, they've definitely come to the forefront to assess behavior at a deeper level. Now, here's the interesting thing. Studying wolves and studying dogs are actually two separate fields in the animal world, right? So you have, you know, your normal animal researchers, right? The people that go to National Geographics, and then you actually have a new form of researcher. It's called an anthrozoologist, right? Anthrozoologists are people who study domesticated animals that live with humans. So cats, dogs, horses, like mini ponies, like animals that we domesticate and keep as pets, right? And they study the behavior of that. Stanley Coren is a great person to read up on this stuff. And the cool thing is over the last 40 years, a handful of people have created a great amount of research to kind of show the different dynamics from wolves to the modern domesticated dog, right? And this becomes really eye-opening. However, usually what science knows and what the public knows is usually about 10 to 15 years behind, in my opinion, right? So like what we know as dog professionals are what I learned 15 years ago, right? And so I want to tell you guys a little bit about my story as a dog trainer, because I think it's important. I'm not talking just my opinion per se. I have lived through probably about 6 different training philosophy ideas, right? One of which being this dominance theory. Okay, when I was a really young dog trainer, 18, 19 years old, this dominant stuff made sense, right? I act tough, that dog obeys, that dog yields, and this idea in my head made sense at that moment and in those times. The problem is every approach, eventually you start hitting a wall. You're not able to help a certain dog, or you sometimes damage the relationship with you and that dog, right? So I remember, you know, I would help a lot of dogs, what I considered helping. And don't get me wrong, dominance style training, so we'll kind of define that a little bit. Some people might subscribe to the ideology of dominance, where pretty much if you don't take control of your dog's going to try and take control over you, right? And pretty much what this leads to, it kind of leads to holding our dogs in contempt for everything that they do, right? Pooping on the couch is a sign of dominance. Pawing at you could be a sign of dominance, right? We get a lot of these weird misinterpretations. And unfortunately, what it does is it kind of leads to a weird angle in the relationship. So, and I saw this at a really, really young age, where it's either me or the dog. It's either, you know, Viking or victim kind of idea with your dog. And unfortunately, this is not the most passionate, compassionate, loving way to actually raise a dog, because, you know, some people even do these philosophies with puppies, infants, right? And this is where we really see it go completely south. You can mess a dog up if you're too forceful, rough, mean. On that same note, you can mess a dog up if you're not holding your ground, if you're not, if you're too passive, if you're too forgiving, right? And we'll get into that a little bit later, what dominance is, in my opinion. But ultimately, those dominance theories, right? We might have seen some TV shows that do it. There is a lot of the methods, handling of dogs, a lot of the abusive cases, all that stuff has been debunked. There are better ways, and there have been better ways for at least 60, 70 years to be able to train dogs, right? One of the OGs in dog training, you guys may or may not know him, his name's Ian Dunbar. This is a guy who's been a dog trainer for almost close to 50 years now. And so he's seen the evolution of dog training. He was part of the evolution. He wrote books on the evolution of dog training. And it's really interesting because a lot of people don't know that there are famous dog trainers that don't have TV shows, right? So the interesting thing is we have to sometimes do more. As dog trainers, we do research on the greats, the people who did it back then and the people who are doing it now. And what we started to see that was we could create more advanced and well-rounded behaviors by using learning theory, right? And those of you guys who understand learning theory, B.F. Skinner, he created operant conditioning. So it was positive reinforcement, it was negative reinforcement, it's positive punishment, negative punishment. So there's 4 quadrants. And what we learned was that animals, including dogs, like to learn things to be able to get the things that they want, right? So you all seen that video where there's that monkey and he has to like sign banana and the scientist gives them banana, right? So they learn based on necessity what they need to do in order to get the things that they want, okay? So through this evolution of dog training, we start seeing people having a very more scientific approach, right? Literally animals in laboratories, the development of positive reinforcement, all that stuff was tests on rats, tests on different animals. And what they learned was every creature will learn better if there's motivation, some type of natural motivation. So they call it an unconditioned reinforcer, right? So usually it's food, sometimes it's mating, sometimes it was a resource of some sort. It could be like nesting, whatever it was. But if you put something in front of the animal that was an unconditioned or a naturally desired substance, they would work hard to receive it, right? And so this is where positive reinforcement came into play, okay? Then we look at things on that same spectrum, positive reinforcement, negative, positive punishment, negative punishment. We start seeing that there is a lot of other quadrants that start getting thrown into what people would consider to be dominance training. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this up for you guys so you guys see this. Operant conditioning. Here's the simple one. Okay. And then let's see, I think we can see it if we go a little closer. Okay. Can you guys see that? You guys can. Let me get you a little closer. All right. So in operant conditioning, we see that there's a couple quadrants. This is called positive punishment, negative punishment, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, right? Now, in operant conditioning, positive means to add something to the equation, and negative means to remove something in the equation. So you see remove or add. That's what plus or minus means. A lot of times what happens is this gets confused with what is like what is feel goody and what makes the dog feel bad, right? So that's what a lot of times people interpret it as. So people think negative means something that makes the dog feel bad. They think positive is something that the dog likes. Well, in science, the word positive and negative just mean to add or remove something. Now, reinforcement means to increase the behavior to happen again in the future, the likelihood of it happening. And then punishment means to decrease the likelihood that that behavior will happen again in the future. Now, there's 2 types of forces we're dealing with here. We are dealing with things that are desirable or things that are undesirable, right? So I can add something desirable to the equation. I can take something undesirable away to the equation. And ultimately what this is for is so that the learner understands cause and effect, consequential learning. They understand if I make this decision, this happens. If I make that decision, that happens. Now, here's the old idea of dominance training. If there is a problem, you punish it. You punish it. Like it's like whack-a-mole. If a problem pops up, you just kind of bang it down on the head, and that it is supposed to go away over time. Now, we know that if we make multiple mistakes, if we make the same mistake over and over, the bigger the consequence, the less we make it. However, the part that's missing with a lot of dominance training is that the dog will not do what you punished him not to do. However, he doesn't know what to do instead. So unfortunately, positive punishment ends up becoming kind of this process of elimination. The dog doesn't necessarily know how to act, necessarily, because they don't know what the proper behaviors are. Okay. So wanted to just introduce that to you guys, because so we can kind of understand what dominance theory is. So people think that any use of punishment is dominance theory, right? Or any use of toughness or meanness is dominance, right? And so what happens is then we get left with a little bit of a paradigm where we are training dogs based on how they feel. We're training dogs based on what we perceive to be nice or necessary. And then we go ahead and we train dogs based on only if they're showing negative behaviors that we want to curb, right? So it's kind of like we're just dealing with problems as they come. If there are no problems, then we don't have to address anything. But this is a kind of an interesting thing, because there's a lot of things that we do with dogs that we would never do with human children, right? And a lot of my dog clients, they will definitely, dogs are big members of a family. I know my dog is like my son. But what ends up happening is if we fall into a different mindset, right? So we have dominance ideas and theories over here. But if we fall into a different mindset where, we can't say no to the dog, or we shouldn't be assert ourselves to our dogs. We shouldn't try and impugn our dog. This is all true. I mean, you shouldn't impugn your dog at all, but we shouldn't hold our ground as another creature. This tends to run the risk of sometimes we can spoil the dog or confuse the dog of what they should or shouldn't be doing. On that other hand, on the dominant side, we start seeing that if we are too firm, too aggressive, we can actually develop a lot of fear in the relationship. So this is where we always have to strike a balance. And over the last 15 years, this idea of balanced dog training has been developed. So I would say I've been doing this enough. I've done a lot of work with different training formats and different training methods to consider myself a balanced dog trainer. And so what a balanced dog trainer is, please hold. Okay. So what a balanced dog trainer is, a balanced dog trainer is a dog trainer who understands the need for both reinforcement in a positive way, motivation, repetition, coaching, conditioning, all of that, but also understands the necessity of limits, boundaries, rules, guidance, guidelines, right, for dogs to live by. Right. And so what happens as a balanced dog trainer, there is not one method or one particular blueprint to training that any balanced dog trainer can approach, because not every dog is the same. Not every dog owner is the same. Not every family dynamic is the same. Not every living environment is the same. So there are so many angles to what we have to try and figure out, what pieces of the puzzle we have to try and figure out to make a behavior work for a family, or to solve a specific behavior for that family. Now, here's the big thing is you may have had much dog experience. And if you've had plenty of dogs, you might know that each dog has its own type of personality. Okay. The way I like to break it down is there are dogs who are assertive, which means they like to engage and interact with the world. There are some dogs that even like to boss things around, right? So I'm going to explain different tiers of dominant traits in dogs. Okay. Now, again, when we're dealing with genetics, dominant traits, we know the word dominant means to be tough, in society, and to be tough. When we're talking about dominant traits, we're talking about things that we bred dogs to do over time, right? Dominant as what is the strongest trait that we see in a lot of dogs. Okay. So there was 3 different levels of dominant traits that we looked for in majority of dogs, with the exception of some lap dogs. Okay. But it's only been the last 130 years that we've actually bred dogs to be tamer, right? With, in essence, to be more couch potatoes, to be a little slower, to not be as engaging, right? But we see a bunch of different bloodlines, like Australian cattle dogs, German Shepherds, Rottweilers, Bouvier. I mean, you see all these different big, strong bloodlines of dogs that still exist, terriers, all this stuff. And they come from hundreds and hundreds of years of breeding for dominant traits. So our first dominant trait that we bred for dogs was, we call this traditional dominance in dogs, okay? The dog had a character where if trouble came to him or her, that the dog wouldn't go looking for trouble, but if trouble came to me, I would hold my ground, right? So this is probably 90% of dogs fall into this category, right? In essence, these are dogs who hold their ground. Doesn't mean they're aggressive, doesn't mean that they're mean, doesn't mean that they're tough. It just means I don't go looking for trouble, but if they come to me, if trouble comes to me, I will stand up for myself, right? And this was a huge trait that we wanted with dogs when we were hunters and gatherers, when we were living on farms, when we had ranches, all those things. So this was a huge trait that we sought after. So level 2 dominant trait, we looked for dogs who had competitive genes. So competitive genes means a dog who likes games and competition, right? So if you guys have a type of dog who has a competitive gene, it kind of looks like this. Anything can be turned into a game or a contest, right? So like sometimes huskies, as soon as you want to ask that dog to come, the dog starts running around and starts dodging you, right? As soon as you pet the dog starts slap boxing you and wanting to wrestle. If you take the toy away from the dog keeps trying to grab the toy so that you can continue playing, right? And so we look at this as a little bit higher levels of competition, right? So some dogs have competition. When we go to very high levels of competition, we call it the gladiator gene or fight drive. So this is things that people would look for, maybe like a police dog, right? We want a police dog who has no quit in him. So if we had a police dog that, you know, when the gun got shot off, he would just shut down. Well, that's not really an effective police dog. So we would get a police dog who had a lot of fight and drive in him. So that way, if the bad guy started running away and started elbowing him, that the dog would actually get stronger, right? So this is more of a very competitive dog. Okay. Hi, Erica. You're thinking about your husky, right? So this is what we would call level 2 dominance, a high competitive drive. Okay. Then through dog training, we actually started breeding dogs who had a knack for telling other animals what to do. And this is where we start getting into our like pastoral dogs, our herding dogs, our shepherd dogs, our cattle dogs, all these types of dogs. And these dogs have a natural desire to want to tell other living creatures what to do, right? And so based on the different types of dogs that you guys might have had in your life or exposed to, or what mixes they might be, you might see different character traits up here in their head, okay? And so these types of character traits, in my opinion, they guide our programs and training. They should guide our raising goals with our dogs, okay? Because the one thing that we cannot change as dog trainers is genetics, right? We cannot take the prey drive out of a dog, but what we can do is we can teach them to take that prey drive and hone it into something positive, like a tennis ball, a frisbee, a squeaker toy, a tug toy, and we can teach the dog that that is your outlet for that, you know, natural born gift that you were given. We cannot take the protectiveness out of a German Shepherd, right? We cannot take the obsession for birds out of a Vizsla or a Pointer, right? These are the genetics of the dog. And always what I tell my clients is, whatever your dog's first name is, let's say Ozzy, for example, right? Daniel, you're on. Ozzy is a cattle dog. Ozzy is the dog that is loving, caring, sweet, kind, amazing, tender, all of that. That's who Ozzy is. However, Ozzy also has a part of his brain that is a cattle dog. And usually in dog training and in general, we're not necessarily trying to train the dog that we're in love with. We're trying to train the genetics of the dog that we love, right? So the desire to hunt things, or the desire to compete against things, or the desire to control things. We're actually trying to just change the genetics that have been programmed into that dog. And the reason I bring this up is because genetics tends to be one of the main reasons why dominance theory became a thing, okay? We bred dogs for so many years to have certain jobs and certain kind of pre-programming, right? It's a beautiful thing. If you guys see a golden retriever at 8 weeks old, you grab a tennis ball, you throw that tennis ball, that golden retriever will run, grab that tennis ball, bring it back to you and be like, hey, you dropped something, here you go, right? So genetics are a beautiful, beautiful thing, how we can selectively breed for dogs. But when we were breeding certain types of dogs over the last 100 years, we saw that certain sought after bloodlines, dogs who symbolize strength, dogs who symbolized safety, dogs who symbolized military status, dogs who symbolized, pastoral utility, right? All these dogs, they all came with very strong hardwiring. And so we may have heard of these rules, right? We call them the 10 Commandments of dog ownership. We've all heard the rules. I'm not saying you guys have to subscribe to these rules, but we've heard them, okay? No dog in bed, no dog on the couch, no dog in the kitchen, no feeding dogs human food, no dogs, sleeping where the kids sleep. No, like all of these rules, we've heard things like them before, right? And if you subscribe to all 10 of those rules, it's pretty messed up, because then we go, well, what the hell can I do with my dog, right? And the reason that these rules, those 10 commandments, became common knowledge in society is because there was a time where we, as people, we took dogs from the field, or we took dogs from the military, we took dogs who were working dogs, and we brought those dogs into our homes. And the interesting thing is, a working dog is hardwired to be a certain way. So a German Shepherd is hardwired to eventually protect the family or the territory. Cattle dogs eventually will want to control things, including skateboards and bicycles and runners, right? This is very predictable stuff. However, these 10 rules that people came up with, the no couch, no this, no that, no this, no that, this was because a lot of times when we invited an animal into our house, dogs with strong genetics had the possibility to, anything that they could do outside, they'd learn to do inside, right? Which means if my dog was protective and territorial of the yard, if I kept that dog inside the house and gave them free range of everything, then unfortunately that dog has the possibility of getting territorial and protective of the inside of my house as well as the outside of my house, right? If my dog poops and pees outside indiscriminately, the likelihood of my dog coming into the house where he would poop and pee, right? So anything a dog could do outside, if these rules were recommended to society, because a lot of people were running into, my dog chewed up the couch, my dog just ate the cat, my dog bites people at the front door, my dog does, there's all these crazy things. So as a solution, people at the time who were dog behavior specialists, they said, okay, don't let your dog do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, pretty much avoiding the problem versus training the solution, right? So we start seeing this. Now, I will say this, there is wisdom in those 10 commandments. However, you don't have to subscribe to all 10, right? They're based on who your dog is. You need to pick certain house rules that fit your dog's personality. Okay. And so this insubordination of don't let your dog do this, don't let your dog do that, don't let your dog do this, don't let your dog do that, this all kind of led to this idea of dominance. It didn't create it, but it definitely fed the already pre-existing notion that dogs have a hierarchy and they're going to fuck you before you fuck them. Pretty much this was the mentality of dominance. I'm giving you guys all this history because I want you guys to see. Oh, thank you, Westside Wellness and Rehabilitation. So I want you guys to see all of this because it is so important for us to know how this got developed as a society, right? Over many years, this idea of dominance, it's a very complicated system, but people try and explain it very simply. And pretty much what it's turned into in society is anything that is dominant is mean, tough, aggressive, etc. Right? So for the last 12 years, I've avoided using the word, well, I can't say 12 years. For the last at least 5 years, I've made it a really big point to not use the word dominance when I teach people. Right? I'm only using it in this particular seminar because I know that dominance gives such a visceral, feeling to the public and to society that I like to call it influence. So dominance can now be replaced with the word influence. And when I teach dominance, or influence or parenting to my dog owners, it's really important for me to teach them a couple different pillars of influence over our animals. And I pull this from animal psychology across the board. I pull this from human psychology. I pull this from a bunch of different places and all the research that I've done to help make it make sense to us, the human being, because we're the ones that raise our dogs. Okay, so I want to share this interpretation of dominance with you guys. Hopefully you enjoy it. Hopefully it helps simplify certain things and it helps put things in their place. Because if you guys go on the internet, you guys know you guys can get a lot of information, and sometimes it can be really confusing. And I want you guys to know, for some reason in the media, people want to paint things as black or white. So you're either a dominance trainer or you're either a positive reinforcement trainer, right? But I want you guys to understand something very simple. Dog training, just like child raising, there is a spectrum. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, so many different colors of training possibilities, training styles, training tools, training circumstances that need to be assessed. And my job as a balanced dog trainer is to try and figure those things out the best that I can, to the best of my experience, the best of my ability. And thank God I've been doing this long enough where I can be pretty efficient at it. So let me go ahead and share this dominance theory with you guys, my interpretation of it. And if you guys have any questions, go ahead and write them in the live chat and we can go over them in, So dominance gets broken up into 4 different settings. Let me go ahead and show you. I'm going to go ahead and turn off this light so you guys don't get that glare. Okay, let's go ahead and pull you guys a little closer. I can't get rid of that darn light. All right, I want you guys to remember the word dominance can be replaced with the word influence. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so different layers to dominance. Okay, if we were to break down dominance or influence, we can break it down into the physical realm, the mental realm, emotional realm, and then last but not least, the social realm. Okay, now qualities to each of these layers to dominance, let's go ahead and break them down one by one. Okay, physical dominance, we see this a lot in sports. We see this a lot in most sports follow physical dominance, right? There are certain sports that there is definitely a mind game, a mental game to sports, but however, we see very constantly that the bigger, the faster, the stronger in a physical activity tends to be the victor. Not always, because there is strategy sometimes, but this is something we can subscribe to as a community, that sometimes the faster, bigger, stronger wins the fight. The faster, bigger, stronger gets the resource, the faster, bigger, stronger, etc. Right now, I want you guys to think primitively. This is not necessarily a model that is used all the way for society, but I want you guys to think primitively. At the bottom line, if I'm bigger, faster, and stronger than you, or in essence, I take actions to be able to get the things that I want, I win, right? If I'm the first one, what does they say? The early bird gets the worm, right? So if I'm first, if I'm faster, I win, right? If I'm stronger in the sense I was able to carry more than you, I win, okay? So this makes sense. Now, mental dominance becomes, it's all up here. It's a mental game. It is confidence. It is, are you smarter or more intellectual? Are you persistent? Are you willful? Right? And I chose these specific words on purpose. Composed is also very important as well, right? How fast do you lose respect for people who are not composed, right? So mental game, we've all seen like poker face. Poker face is all a mental game, right? So you shouldn't be able to read my emotions, right? It's all, I can be persistent. I need to be smarter than you. I can be more willful. I can play mind games. So this is another way to influence something using mental tactics, right? Another one would be emotional dominance, right? Or emotional influence. My favorite example for this is moms. Like, how many mothers can just make their kids feel something to make them do something, right? So my mom literally had trained me one year to buy her what she wanted for Christmas. And she did like, oh, it'd be so nice and this and that. And I remember I felt like so driven to order that thing, get it pre-ordered and send it to her, that it was good. On that same note, parents are really good at guilt tripping, right? So anytime my mother was disappointed or upset, or I could read those emotions on her, it would change and influence the way I made decisions and thought about things, right? So emotional influence is also a really big part. Okay. Now, last but not least, we look at social dominance. So social dominance, pretty much people who are in charge, they may have some of these qualities. However, socially, if we look at a big group, and this is also, packs of wolves, right? We can look at this. Packs of wolves usually have an alpha male, alpha female. But there is as much drama in wolf packs. If you guys have time, watch all of the National Geographic's Yellowstone, Yosemite documentaries. There's probably about 10 different wolf packs and different things. And what you will see is there is as much drama in wolf packs as there are in like soap operas. It's crazy. There's betrayal, there's sleeping with your brother, there's all this crazy stuff. And it's so funny. The more that you understand about wolves, you understand they're not as distant in behavior as from humans, right? They're actually following a lot of similar patterns, a lot of similar drives, motivations, etc. But anyways, let's go back to social dominance. The responsible one, aka the consistent one, is easier to take leadership positions. Diligent, the one who is taking action immediately, tends to be in positions of power or leadership. The commanding one, obviously this is a confidence thing. This is the one that's not scared to assert themselves. This is also something that we see. And then integrity has to do compassion and empathy for the rest of the people who they are taking care of, right? So this idea of dominance can be broken down into different types of sections. And there was a time that I thought that you had to go through physical in order to achieve mental. You had to achieve mental before you could achieve emotional, and you had to achieve emotional before you achieve social. But what I've realized over the years is that different dogs, different personalities have different starting points. Okay, so for example, how is it possible that a Chihuahua, a little tiny Chihuahua, maybe you guys have seen this, a little tiny dog, Maltese, Chihuahua, you name it, doesn't matter, a little small dog. How is it that they are the boss of a pack of 2 pit bulls, 1 husky, right? 4 dogs, but the Chihuahua is the one in charge. How is this the case, right? How is it that you could have the biggest, toughest dog, a Doberman, but the cat that lives in the other room torments the heck out of that dog? How is this possible, right? If we went through the very normal hierarchies of dominance where the biggest, baddest, toughest will survive, then pretty much that dog should eat that cat 100% of the time. And that's what would make sense, right? But what we start seeing is mental dominance and emotional dominance tend to become more of the sophisticated forms of influence that animals put on each other. Okay, physical dominance is actually not used as much as we think it is in the animal kingdom. This is why growling and snarling and barking and baring teeth, all of this attitude and like throwing shade at each other is actually an attempt to not get in a physical fight, right? So, you always see this in a comedy, but there's always like that guy who like wants to fight but doesn't really want to fight. And he's like, what's up, bro? I'm crazy. I'm freaking loco, bro. You don't want some of this? And the whole goal of those dramatizations is to try and scare the other person off without even having to touch them, right? And so animals don't like to fight as much as we think they like to fight. And so this automatically debunks this idea of physical aggression, physical dominance as a go-to technique in training or raising of an animal, right? They don't like it. However, we will see that a lot of dogs are super stubborn we will see that a lot of dogs are persistent, a lot of dogs are willful, and this could be based on, this is just how they're wired. This could also be based on their genetic drive, right? So we might see that a dog really likes a squirrel, and that squirrel makes that dog so persistent and willful that it's really hard for us to break through to that, right? And so what ends up happening is these are different ways of getting into the dog's psyche. The most sophisticated form of dominance are these two, the mental game and the emotional game. Now, let me explain the emotional game a little bit more to you guys. Emotional influence is your dog's familiarity with your feeling, which means we've all heard this in dog training. Make sure that you praise your dog a lot. Make sure that you let them know when you're happy. You let them know when you're excited. Think of just a child, right? Oh, Timmy, you just rode your bike. Oh my gosh, that drawing is beautiful, right? You want to give emotional context to things. And the more that you give a learner emotional context, the more receptive they become to the small shifts of your emotional states, right? So you all might have heard this idea that dogs read energy, right? Energy is synonymous with intention. So if we have an angry intention, if we have a happy intention, you're going to see that your dogs respond based on what type of energy, body language, intention you're giving off. So we refer to this as emotional influence, right? So your emotional influence is really, really important. A really common one is this, where we see it fail. Your dog's not coming to you, for example, right? And we go, Rover, come, Rover. And very quickly, because we had to repeat ourselves 2 or 3 times, Rover come turns into Rover, 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 get over here right now, right? And all of a sudden we get pissed off, and we get so pissed off that we start projecting bad, aggressive, mean energy, right? Now, the funny thing is, even though we're getting upset, sometimes our dogs perceive that as, oh my God, I'm in trouble. What happened? Or, oh my God, mom and dad is pissed right now. I'm not going to go over there. So sometimes we tend to shoot ourselves in the foot because we don't have the ability to change our emotional state in that moment, right? So some of the qualities for emotional influence, you got to be empathetic. You got to have your feelers on. If you don't have your feelers on working with animals, you can get bit. You can get it wrong. You can damage the relationship. You can do a bunch of different things, okay? You have to be sincere, okay? So try not to fake it as much as possible. Sometimes you have to fake it till you make it when it comes to feelings, because sometimes it's not our natural suit, but you can't fake it. Forbearance or forbearing qualities means you have to be tolerant. You have to have self-control. You can't be impulsive and reactive. Sometimes, just as we understand in human psychology, just listening is really important. Now, don't get me wrong, our dogs aren't talking to us in our ear, but if you don't know how to calm your emotion down and you just react towards your dog, it's going to be very difficult for you to develop emotional dominance. Easy for you to develop fear, but not emotional dominance. And so what emotional dominance is, and maybe you guys have seen this, if you project a feeling or a posture or a phrase to your dog, and you see it triggers an emotional reaction, now you know that you have emotional dominance. So here's an example. If you go to your dog and you go, who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? Right? And get very playful. Does your dog come to you, wag his tail? And he goes, yeah, I'm a good boy, right? That's good. Your dog understands what your positive feelings look like. If you lay down on the ground and go, come here, I love you, and just give him a kiss, does your dog get soft and melt on you, right? He may or he may not, right? On the flip side of that is if you were to go, if you were to stare at your dog and act really upset, don't touch him, but just stare at him. Would your dog go, oh my God, so sorry, what did I do? Or would your dog go, hey mom, how's it going? Right? So we have to assess, can we influence our dogs by using our energy, our attitudes, and our emotion, right? That's what emotional influence really is, okay? So this little paradigm here, I want you guys to just think of this when working. There are certain types of dog breeds. I won't generalize it too much, but for example, there are dogs who are physically dominant. They are gladiators. They like to bash each other. They like to bite each other. They like to grab each other. They like to use their bodies physically on a regular basis. So sometimes when training, we might have to use a little bit more things that they're used to, which is physicality. Now, physicality doesn't have to be aggression. Physicality usually just comes in the form of action. Taking action convinces the dog that there will be a consistent result after X, Y, and Z, right? So an example would be, a dog who likes to jump on me. Yes, we can go and teach the dog to sit. We can teach the dog to stay. We can teach the dog all those things. But when the dog is excited and loses control, sometimes they do things impulsively. So if impulsively, there becomes a very consistent physical follow through from the human, whether it be pushing the dog down, giving a leash correction, walking away, whatever it is, the action dictates to the dog what the result is. Okay. If there aren't any actions being taken, then those dogs won't get it. They won't understand. They'll be like, I still don't know what you want from me. Okay. So taking action tends to be a really important for most dogs, but there are some dogs who need you to take action so that they don't have to. Right. And when we go into aggression and behavioral issues, this becomes a little bit more relevant. Okay. Mental dominance. This is something really interesting as well. There are some dogs who use their brains a lot, who try and figure you out, who try to train you to do the things that they want to do because they're smart, right? And when you have a dog like this, trying to use physical techniques, not going to work because you're not going to be able to break through to the thing that they think is respectable, right? I always say, like, someone used to say, like, you'll respects game, right? So if a dog who is a physical dog sees that you can be physical sometimes too, then they go, oh, sensei, oh, love you, right? Same thing with the dog who is very smart and intellectual. If you can outsmart him, then that dog goes, you're my master, right? So game respects game. Then we have some dogs who are just emotionally driven. Dogs who are a little more sensitive. Dogs who, if you just go, oh, why'd you do that? The dog goes, I'm so sorry, right? So we have some emotional dogs who we can use different tactics to influence their behavior, to create certain limits, but also to create certain motivations, right? And I think it's our understanding of these three quadrants, the emotional, the mental, and the physical, that really helps kind of put things in their place and put things in boxes for us, right? Because based on who your dog is and based on the circumstance, you may have to practice one, multiple, or one or the other, right? And sometimes you might have to practice multiples at the same time. Okay, so I want you guys to just keep this in mind. All right. When we're dealing with, okay, any questions on that, what I just said, before I move on? We got about another 15 minutes. I have one more thing to talk about. Oops, hold on, I'm pulling up one more slide. If there's any questions, guys, please write them in. If not, we will move on to the last section. No questions. Okay, we're moving on. So let me go ahead and introduce you guys to So ways that we create influence over our dogs. All right. So if we kind of look at the physical, the mental, the emotional influence of a creature, we can always kind of look at the child development, right? And when we look at child development, we see that at a very young age, a parent physically has to guide the child more, right? Time to go to bed, time to put your clothes on, time to do this. This is how you wash the dish, whatever. At a very young age, I'm not sure the exact range, but at a very young age, our parents have to physically make us do things because we can't do for ourselves just yet, right? So at a very young age, we learn that we can get physically controlled by our parents. Doesn't mean an abusive way. It just means we can physically be told to do things and guided and raised to do things, right? The second part, we talked about mental dominance. There becomes an age where we start developing our personality. We start pushing back. We start lying. We start challenging our parents. We start doing all of these things. And it's the way that the parent handles those scenarios that affect what our outcome is later, right? In adolescence or young adulthood, right? And children, in essence, are pretty, they have the tendency of being very, lack of a better word, selfish, right? So sometimes this idea of empathy or caring what other people want or need or things doesn't necessarily always develop at a young age. It might develop a little bit later in life. But that's where we start dealing with emotional influence, where we start getting drawn by what we get, kind of motivated to do, right? This is what our passions are, pretty much. So we can kind of see that in child development, we start saying physical dominance gets developed. Okay, mental dominance gets developed if you're a persistent, willful individual, right? And then the emotional dominance, and all these three things create a well-rounded idea of respect. Okay. Now, one thing that we see is in mental dominance. Mental dominance is controlling something without the use of physical force and just your willpower and your mind. We start saying that there's a couple components that we see practiced by parents. Okay. There comes an age where a parent cannot physically make their kid do anything anymore, right? Where the kid is literally as tall as you. Usually it's adolescence and teenage stage. But the three things that parent can control are that parent can control space, privileges, and resources. Okay. So what this means is if I can control where my kid can and can't be and actually get them to listen, great. That means I have influence over them. If I can control their privileges, when they need to go to bed, when they need to get back from their friend's house, how long they can play video games, then I have influence over that person, right? And then resources, Dad, can I have 20 bucks? Did you do your homework? You didn't do your homework? No, $20, right? So we start saying that we can control resources as well. Now, this is on the human model, but let's see how it applies to the dog model. At a very, very young age, if you guys have ever worked with a dog trainer, if you ever worked with me, you will know that I'm a huge advocate for structure, independence training, den training, creating a balance, right? And so this might be, teaching our dogs to chew on stuff, teaching our dogs to go to a crate, teaching our dogs to just do a number, create a good routine and management system for our dogs. That's really, really important. Now, when we do this with our dogs, sometimes we have to control their space, right? So sometimes our dogs aren't allowed in certain rooms of the house. That's okay. That's what a dominant figure, an influential figure says. My dad had an office that I was never allowed to go into. None of the kids were allowed to go into my dad's office, right? And so it's okay to have that rule. When you're in charge, you can say, this is mine and this is yours, right? We can kind of partition your space, my space. Make sense? So definitely okay for us to do with our dogs. When we talk about privileges, is what our dogs can and can't do. So are our dogs allowed to be on the couch? Are our dogs allowed to be roaming the house free? Are our dogs allowed to, play with their toys in the kitchen or run back and forth through the halls? What are our dogs allowed to do? Again, that's based on your household. But this is where those 10 commandments came into play, right? The no couch, no human food, no this, no that. And don't get me wrong, it kind of leaned too far to the unrealistic, but that's what they were trying to teach, right? If we can be in charge of what the dog can and can't do, then that also puts us in an influential scenario. Okay. Now, when we're looking at resources are anything that the dog likes. Sometimes affection is a resource, food is a resource, toys are a resource, freedom is a resource, right? So space can sometimes be a resource. Affection is a resource. So many things can be a resource, and it really changes from dog to dog. However, these three things are leveraging points, right? In a really good dog management system, if we can control the dog's space and get them to respect that, if we can control the dog's privileges and get them to understand sometimes mommy says you can have it, now sometimes mommy says you can't have it, and teach our dogs to be okay with that, and also be able to giveth and taketh away of resources, we start seeing now our influence over our dogs, or dominance, gets stronger and stronger and stronger. A lot of times, people who have behavioral problems or relationship problems with their dogs they usually don't have control over all three of these, or at least two of them, right? And I want you guys to put that in the back of your mind. All right. So sometimes there are dogs who don't ask permission to steal food. They just straight up take it. Your back is turned, it's gone. Right. If you have a treat in your hand, they try and rip your fingertips open to just take the treat out from your hand. Right. So that would be an example of areas that need work. We look at privileges. There are people who don't control, and there are certain dog scenarios where the dog needs control. They don't control what the dog can and can't do. Right. I always have this theory that people will let their dogs do whatever they want as long as they're not doing three things. As long as the dog's not being aggressive, as long as the dog's not being annoying, or as long as the dog's not being destructive. Your dog just has to avoid these three things, and technically we will let our dogs do whatever the heck that they want. All right. So privileges is something to really think about as well. Now, space, this is the common one that we see not really controlled in younger life of the dog. So if the dog is a puppy, it's going to be so important for you guys to make sure that you train this dog to have a good relationship with space, right? The dog should not have too much space. Usually what I see is too much space too soon is like giving a 10-year-old the car keys and then he drives around town and then you try and take it back from him, right? So controlling space is really important. How we sustain influence over the dog is by making sure that we have these three leveraging points. Okay. Obviously, obedience is really important. But what these 3 points really do is these three things allow us to, because we are the ones in control of the space, privilege, and resources, it allows us now to leverage them to be able to get the behaviors that we want from our dogs. Okay. So if you guys have any questions about these 3 points, email me, write us a message. We'd be happy to talk about it. And we're going to spend the next 5 to 10 minutes just going over dominance questions that you guys might have, or in general, just any dog training questions. But this is going to be the end of my explanation. There are a couple more things that I can talk about. However, we start breaking down and getting really into the nitty gritty. But this is a lot of the surface area. I wanted you guys to understand that history of dominance. I wanted you guys to understand how it doesn't work. I wanted you guys to understand this new interpretation of dominance and the different degrees and levels of it, because dominance is a very sophisticated process, or leadership or ownership or parenting. It's a very complex idea that can't necessarily be simplified with a technique, right? And so good dog trainers are going to try and help you navigate this, right? Because there isn't going to be one way to train a dog, and there's definitely not going to be one way to convince, motivate a behavior. Okay. So hope this was helpful to you guys. Thank you guys so much for sticking around. It's been 57 minutes. 10 of you guys have stuck around. 2 thumbs up. Thank you guys so much. If you guys are watching, hit me another thumbs up. I would love to have all the thumbs up as possible if you can. But go ahead. I'm going to be here for the next 5-10 minutes. Let's go ahead and chat about questions. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of water. Okay. Oh, perfect. What's an example of social dominance training? What does that look like? Okay, so social dominance, and then I'll go grab my water. Actually, I'm gonna go grab my water real quick, and then I'm gonna come right back. If that's okay. 1 second. Where'd my cup go? Oh, you know what? I had my coffee. Totally forgot I had coffee. So social dominance becomes a byproduct. So dominance exists, or influence exists, between 2 individuals, right? Social dominance can only exist over a group. Okay. So for example, in any partnership, and again, this could be circumstantial. There's many times where there's a husband and a wife, or a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and you'll see that in some scenarios, the husband takes charge and takes leadership. And in some scenarios, the wife will take charge and take leadership based on their skill set, based on their abilities, based on their personalities, right? So dominance on an individual level, that's usually going to be the mental, the emotional, the physical, right? Those 3 exist on the couple, or on the group, right? So me and a dog, me and a child, me and and another living creature, right? The social dominance only exists over a group. So, for example, like I used to run a doggy daycare for many, many years. And in that doggy daycare, we could have 25 dogs running around, and we were one of the only daycares in Los Angeles where we'd be able to get all the dogs in a downstate within 30 seconds. Now, mind you, we were primarily a training facility, so majority of the dogs were trained. However, there were some dogs that weren't trained that just followed the monkey see, monkey do, just did what the other dogs did. But what happens is social leadership has a lot to do with caring for the group and making sure that that group feels that they are under your charge, that you're not in charge of them, but they're under your charge. In essence, your job is to keep them safe and keep them protected and to have their backs and all that stuff. So social dominance tends to be a thing that only exists with groups, is what I'm trying to say, Daniel. But those would be the components, which you saw on the slideshow before. All right. Any other questions? Paco Taco. No problem, Daniel. Any other questions? Alrighty, guys. If there's no more questions, I will bid you adieu. And I will see you guys next week. Next Sunday, we're going to be back at this time. Actually, those of you who are still here, I want to go ahead and give you guys a quick announcement. We are launching today. We are launching Canis Academy online, which is going to be our online virtual group classes. We have 2 group classes that are running. We have a puppy-specific group class for dogs under 6 months, and then we have a rescue-specific group class for dogs over 6 months who have been rescued recently. So we really want to we understand that this was a really tough time economically for a lot of people. So that's why I've been really wanting to give a lot of these free advice and free training online. So what we've done is we've actually given a 60% discount on all of our group classes. So on those 2 group classes, what normally would be about $300 for a group class in person, we're only doing a $99 subscription for that group class. It's a 5-week class. Both classes are 5 weeks. So if you guys have any friends or know anybody who just got a puppy, we have a puppy specific class just for them, or people who just got a rescue dog or it's only been a couple weeks, we have a rescue class that goes just for them. And that's where we talk about obedience. We talk about socialization. We talk about patience work. We talk about a lot of different components that are going to help them be able to keep those dogs in their home and happy and well balanced. And we actually go over this type of stuff in our parenting and coaching training. Okay. So guys, thank you so much. We will talk to you guys next week. Again, if you guys have any friends, please let them know. If you guys haven't, give me a thumbs up on this video. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up on this video just so it looks like people liked it. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys around. See you next week.